Part 3. Alliance with Antony. c. 4431 BCE. Chapter 6. The Goddess and the General. The summons arrived in the spring of 41 BCE, carried by a Roman tribune whose stern demeanor barely concealed the implicit command within the courteous diplomatic language. Mark Antony, triumvir of Rome, and now undisputed master of the eastern provinces, requested, or rather demanded, my presence in the port city of Tarsus in Cilicia. The official pretext was clear. I was to answer for my actions, or perceived lack thereof, during Rome's recent bloody civil strife. Antony required an explanation for my delay in supporting the Caesarian cause, which was now his cause, against Cassius, and more pressingly, he needed to secure my kingdom's loyalty and resources now that he held absolute sway in the east. It was a delicate, dangerous summons, one I could not possibly refuse without inviting immediate Roman hostility, yet one brimming with both peril and profound opportunity. My moment to negotiate Egypt's future with Rome's new strongman had arrived. I remembered Antony only fleetingly from my time in Rome, a striking figure, undoubtedly, radiating a confidence bordering on swagger, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, and now a celebrated hero of Philippi. He was famed, according to reports reaching Alexandria, for his raw courage in battle, his extravagant generosity, his almost visceral charisma with the legions, but also for his notorious love of pleasure, his impulsiveness, and his susceptibility to flattery. A very different breed of Roman, I surmised, from the coolly intellectual Caesar or the stiff-necked senators like Cicero. If I was to secure not just his tolerance, but his active friendship, his powerful alliance, I needed a strategy that appealed as much to his appetites and ego as to his strategic sense. Humility and supplication would be the wrong approach. They might satisfy his Roman authority, but would gain me little leverage. I needed to meet him not as a chastened client queen, but as an equal force, dazzling and undeniable. So, I resolved to prepare an entrance he and the watching world would never forget. It was a calculated risk. Ostentation could be perceived as defiance. But I gambled that Antony, who styled himself a new Dionysus, would respond better to spectacle and divine illusion than to groveling. Ignoring the nervous protests of some of my more cautious advisers, who urged me to appear modestly before the Roman general, I instead crafted an arrival fit for the goddess I claimed to embody. I would subtly compel Antony to come to me, enthralled rather than sitting in stern judgment. To this end, I commissioned a magnificent river barge, built or perhaps lavishly refitted for the purpose. Its hull was gilded, shimmering under the Anatolian sun like solid gold. The billowing sails were dyed the richest Tyrian purple, the costly color signifying supreme royalty, and they were cleverly saturated with exotic perfumes. Jasmine, kyphi, rose so fragrant that the onshore breezes themselves carried our intoxicating scent ahead of us, announcing my approach before I was even visible. Banks of gleaming silver oars, perhaps inlaid with ivory, struck the waters of the Cydnus River in perfect unison, synchronized to the gentle, seductive music of unseen flutes, lyres, and soft drums, each rhythmic splash a note in an ethereal, waterborne symphony. On the appointed day, my barge sailed slowly up the Cydnus River towards Tarsus. News of my extravagant, almost otherworldly approach had clearly raced ahead. By the time my vessel neared the city's bustling quay, a vast, expectant crowd lined the riverbanks, drawn by rumor and the unusual fragrance hanging in the air. Antony himself, I was told, sat waiting upon a formal judgment seat set up in the agora, the marketplace, prepared to receive me with the imposing authority of a Roman magistrate about to preside over a provincial trial. But what unfolded next deliberately transformed his tribunal into a scene snatched directly from myth, designed to overwhelm mortal authority with divine allure. I reclined languidly under a golden canopy erected on the barge's deck, deliberately dressed not in austere royal robes, but as Aphrodite, the goddess of love, emerging gracefully from the sea foam. The gown was of shimmering sea-green silk, artfully draped to hint at form without revealing too much. At my side stood my most beautiful handmaidens, meticulously costumed as graceful sea nymphs and attendant graces, fanning me gently with feathered fans. Young cherubic boys, adorned with tiny golden wings, flitted about playfully as Eros figures. The entire tableau was carefully designed to evoke the legendary union of Aphrodite and Dionysus, a potent, unmistakable visual metaphor for the powerful convergence I intended this meeting to be. As the barge glided slowly, majestically, towards the pier, the clouds of perfume wafted over the onlookers, thicker now, almost dizzying. People in the crowd began to murmur, awestruck, pointing and whispering that Aphrodite herself, the goddess of love and beauty, had truly come to Tarsus to revel with Dionysus. The effect was immediate and electrifying. The marketplace virtually emptied as throngs of citizens surged towards the riverside, jostling for a better view of the unbelievable spectacle. Antony's carefully staged official seat in the agora stood suddenly vacant as even he, Mark Antony, the formidable Roman triumvir, abandoned his stern posture and came down towards the water's edge, drawn irresistibly by the sheer audacity, the beauty, and the growing roar of the crowd. From beneath lowered lashes, I watched him approach, easily identifiable amidst the lesser dignitaries. A man in his prime, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, his handsome, sun-darkened face etched with battle scars, but alive with undisguised astonishment, curiosity, and perhaps nascent delight breaking through his attempt at maintaining Roman gravitas. When the barge finally moored gracefully against the quay, Antony, recovering his composure somewhat, dispatched a formal herald to courteously invite me ashore to dine with him. This was the critical moment. Maintaining my languid pose, I offered a playful, challenging smile and replied, through my own attendant, that he was most welcome to join me aboard my vessel instead. After all, who would dare refuse an invitation directly from the goddess Aphrodite? It was a breathtakingly bold inversion of expected roles. The entire city seemed to hold its breath, watching intently to see how Rome's celebrated strongman, the master of legions, would react to being summoned by a queen he had intended to judge. For a tense second, he simply stared. Then a deep, hearty laugh rolled across the water, a rich, infectious sound that signaled not anger, but amusement, admiration, and, I suspected instantly, his complete surrender in that public, symbolic moment. Before the now cheering approval of the captivated crowd, Mark Antony accepted my invitation. So, the Roman general came aboard my floating Egyptian palace to feast, stepping into my world on my terms. That evening remains luminous in my memory, a pivotal moment where carefully calculated stagecraft merged seamlessly with genuine human connection, altering the trajectory of both our lives. I spared no extravagance for the banquet held on deck under the stars. Our tables overflowed with exotic delicacies flown in from every corner of my kingdom. Luscious figs dripping with honey, pyramids of pomegranates gleaming like jewels, rare freshwater fish caught in the Nile, game birds roasted with spices, all washed down with the finest Egyptian wines, some even sparkling with minute flecks of edible gold leaf. We reclined on cushions of embroidered purple silk, while fragrant Egyptian incense curled languidly in the soft lamplight, casting a dreamy, sensual haze over the proceedings. Antony, clearly trying to match my sophisticated splendor with his bluff soldierly humor and attempts at witty one-upmanship, was nonetheless utterly, visibly enchanted. He marveled openly at the ingenious arrangement of hundreds of lamps suspended overhead, cleverly positioned to reflect in strategically placed mirrored panels, multiplying their light into a dazzling canopy, a feat of engineering and artistry he freely admitted Rome, for all its power, had never conceived. He jested boisterously that next time he would host and show me true, solid Roman greatness, but conceded with a broad, appreciative grin that he was decidedly outdone this evening. It was during those intoxicating hours on the softly rocking barge, surrounded by music and laughter, that Antony and I began to truly discover one another beyond the titles and reputations. I adapted swiftly to his particular brand of humor. He possessed a soldier's wit, often broad and unrefined, punctuated by hearty jests and the occasional wonderfully bawdy anecdote about legionary life. Rather than taking offense at his lack of polished Roman subtlety, I matched him quip for quip, sometimes gently teasing his Roman practicality compared to Alexandrian artistry. I recognized his performance too, a blend of genuine enjoyment and a subtle testing of my own boundaries. At one point, attempting a clumsy trick to impress me, having apparently had poor luck fishing earlier that day, he secretly ordered one of his servants, a diver, to swim beneath the barge and discreetly attach a large, already caught fish to his line. With great fanfare, Antony then triumphantly caught it from the river beside the barge, feigning astonishment at his own unexpected angling prowess. I saw through the ruse immediately, but feigned wide-eyed admiration, playing along with his boyish prank. However, the next time he cast his line with elaborate casualness, I gave a quick, almost imperceptible signal to my own attending diver, who swiftly swam down and deftly hooked a small dried salted herring, a common Alexandrian staple, onto Antony's bait. When he drew up this pitiful, undeniably pre-salted catch, the entire assembled company, sensing the joke, burst into uncontrollable laughter. I raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow and commented sweetly, "I see, General, that your line catches fish already prepared in the Roman style, rather than the fresh fare of our local rivers." For a heartbeat, his eyes widened in comical shock at being so expertly caught in his own game. Then he threw back his head and guffawed louder than anyone, clapping his hands in delighted appreciation of my swift counterprank. In that shared moment of laughter and playful one-upmanship, all remaining pretense of rigid formality seemed to dissolve completely. We were simply two intelligent, powerful people enjoying each other's company, finding a spark of connection across cultures and politics. It struck me forcibly then how different he was from Caesar. Julius had been measured, often ironic, intellectually challenging, yet always maintaining a certain reserve, a distance. Antony was immediate, visceral, charmingly transparent in his appetites and emotions, wearing his heart, his desires, his flaws almost openly on his sleeve. There was a refreshing, almost dangerous simplicity to him. He loved life passionately, unabashedly, and gravitated instinctively towards anyone or anything that could make that life more intense, more vibrant, more enjoyable. By the end of that remarkable night, any notion that I was merely a subordinate client queen, dragging herself reluctantly before a stern Roman proconsul to beg forgiveness, had utterly evaporated. Antony and I parted that evening not as judge and supplicant, not even merely as potential political allies, but as two individuals powerfully drawn to each other, intrigued by the possibilities opening between us. He announced his intention to remain in Tarsus for some time, needing to reorganize the eastern territories under his command, and, critically, to raise funds and supplies for his long-planned ambitious war against Parthia Rome's powerful eastern rival. It became implicitly clear to both of us, without needing explicit articulation, that we could be of immense mutual benefit to each other. Still, beneath the burgeoning personal connection, the political realities remained. He absolutely needed assurance of my unwavering loyalty and access to Egypt's vast resources. I, in turn, urgently required confirmation of Rome's continued favor under his leadership and concrete protection for my kingdom and my dynasty. The following day, Antony reciprocated my hospitality by hosting me ashore, albeit in a less fantastical, more robustly Roman style. He arranged a banquet within his military camp, attempting to rival my floating palace with displays of martial prowess, tents adorned with legionary standards, tables groaning under immense quantities of roasted meats, strong Italian wine flowing freely, and the noisy camaraderie of his senior officers. It was a more boisterous, masculine affair, punctuated by soldiers singing campaign songs and boisterous games of dice played in the torchlit corners. Antony kept a keen, appraising eye on me throughout the evening, perhaps expecting me, the refined Hellenistic queen, to be disconcerted or disdainful of the relative roughness. But I navigated the atmosphere with calculated ease, trading witty toasts in flawless Latin, listening attentively to tales of Roman valor, and even charming the grizzled legionaries by raising a cup to them directly, calling them my brave Roman brothers in arms. This gesture, bypassing the officers to acknowledge the rank and file directly, endeared me enormously to them. More than one hardened centurion reportedly toasted me afterwards as Regina Cordium Queen of Hearts that night. Antony noted my effortless rapport with his men with visible satisfaction. Between these elaborate festivities, Antony and I held several crucial private councils. He adopted a more casual demeanor then, perhaps lounging comfortably on a campaign couch, fanning himself against the humid Cilician heat, while I typically maintained a more erect posture, subtly asserting my regal status even in negotiation. He questioned me closely, though now in a far friendlier, almost conspiratorial manner, about the complex events following Caesar's death, about Cassius's demands on Egypt, and about the precise reasons for my delay in sending tangible aid to the Caesarian cause before Philippi. I answered truthfully, where strategic advantage allowed. Yes, I had fully intended to support Caesar's true heirs, but a verifiable storm had unfortunately damaged my fleet before it could effectively intervene. I conveniently omitted my quiet relief at that outcome, which had spared me from actively engaging against Cassius prematurely. Yes, Egypt possessed great wealth, but I emphasized the pressing needs required to stabilize my own realm after years of internal conflict and recent famine, implying resources were not limitless and required careful husbanding. Throughout these discussions, I simultaneously flattered Antony's ego, acknowledging him unequivocally as the rightful successor to Caesar's authority and prestige in the East, the natural leader destined to avenge Rome's past humiliations against Parthia. "You, Mark Antony," I might have said, leaning slightly forward, my gaze direct and admiring, "are indeed the true Dionysus reborn for our age, strong and beneficent. And just as the god Dionysus once bestowed the gifts of wine and boundless joy upon my ancestors, so too perhaps shall Egypt and Rome, under our wise guidance, exchange gifts of prosperity and mutual strength." He visibly savored such comparisons. Being cast as a living god was a language Antony understood intuitively and relished wholeheartedly. In fact, he soon began playfully addressing me as Aphrodite, or sometimes Venus, in our more private exchanges, with I occasionally reciprocating by calling him my Dionysus. It became a kind of intimate game between us, half serious political theater, half genuine flirtation, but it effectively bound us together in a shared self-created mythology, setting our alliance apart from ordinary diplomatic arrangements. It rapidly became apparent, even to the most obtuse observer at Tarsus, that Antony's admiration for me extended far beyond the purely political or strategic. His glances grew demonstrably warmer, lingering longer. His casual physical touches, an offered hand to help me descend from a chariot, a light brush of my arm as we strolled through a governor's garden discussing troop levies, became more frequent, charged with unspoken meaning. I felt a familiar, powerful spark igniting within me, a warmth spreading through my veins that I had not felt since those intense, danger-filled days with Caesar. Yet this connection felt different, less a slow burn of intellectual meeting, more like a sudden bonfire, blazing quickly, intensely hot, dangerously consuming. Perhaps it was the profound relief of having survived the recent years of precarious widowhood and political uncertainty, or the sheer intoxicating headiness of two such powerful, vibrant personalities colliding at a pivotal moment in history, or simply the assuaging of a deep loneliness I rarely allowed myself to acknowledge. But whatever the complex mixture of reasons, I consciously allowed myself to fall into those enticing embers of mutual attraction and nascent affection. When Antony decided, quite abruptly, to accompany me back to Alexandria that autumn, dispatching trusted legates to manage his pressing affairs in Syria and Asia Minor in his stead, offering the rather flimsy pretext of needing to personally inspect Egypt's capacity to support his upcoming Parthian war effort, no one in either his camp or mine was remotely fooled. It was palpably clear to the entire Eastern Mediterranean world that Mark Antony, triumvir of Rome, and Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, were now lovers as well as political allies. As we sailed southwards together towards my kingdom, my magnificent barge now part of his official fleet, watching the familiar constellations of the southern sky emerge night after night, I felt a surge of profound triumph, mixed perhaps with a tremor of apprehension about where this tempestuous new alliance might lead. I had not only survived the intimidating summons of the Lion of Rome, I had seemingly captivated him, binding his fortunes for now, inextricably, to mine. Caesar, years ago, had been forced upon me by circumstance. Antony now returned with me willingly, captivated by my side. The balance of power felt dramatically, thrillingly shifted. Chapter 7. An Eastern Empire of Two. If our time in Tarsus had been a dazzling prelude, the winter of 40 BCE in Alexandria was an immersion into shared rule and unparalleled delight. Antony seemed to cast off the cares of Roman administration like a heavy cloak, embracing the vibrant pulse of my capital. He plunged into Alexandrian life with the gusto of his professed avatar, Dionysus. Together, we formed a private society, a circle of close friends and courtiers dedicated to pleasure and witty extravagance, playfully known as the inimitable livers. This wasn't mere decadence, as Roman propaganda later sneered. It was a conscious choice to live intensely, to weave governance with joy, perhaps a necessary counterpoint to the grim burdens we both carried. Some nights, escaping the formality of the palace, we would roam the city streets in disguise. Antony dressed as a common soldier, I perhaps as a merchant's wife, mingling anonymously in taverns, eavesdropping on gossip, sometimes playfully knocking on doors, and startling humble citizens with impromptu visits. Alexandria, unlike dour Rome, often responded with amused indulgence rather than scandalized outrage. The contrast between this vibrant, sensuous world and the rigid traditions he wrestled with back in Rome seemed to genuinely invigorate him. There were leisurely boating excursions on Lake Mareotis, grand banquets featuring artists and philosophers from the Museion engaging in fierce debates, hunts in the marshes where Antony, the superb horseman, learned the Egyptian art of fowling with nets. He possessed an infectious zest for life, a warmth that melted the reserve even of my Greek courtiers. In those sun-drenched, laughter-filled months, amidst the shared work of administering Egypt's affairs, for we did discuss grain shipments, trade routes, and local governance between revels, our political alliance deepened into something far more personal, a partnership built on mutual fascination and burgeoning affection. But reality, especially Roman reality, possesses sharp teeth and could not be held at bay indefinitely. By the spring of 40 BCE, urgent dispatches arrived, thick and fast. Troubles brewed in Italy. Antony's strong-willed wife, Fulvia, whom he had left behind, had disastrously taken up arms in his name against young Octavian, his supposed ally in the triumvirate. Her revolt failed, throwing Antony's position in Rome into jeopardy. Then came the news that Fulvia, fleeing Italy, had fallen gravely ill and died in Greece. Antony received the news with a complex mixture of guilt, relief, and profound political anxiety. He knew, and I knew, he had to return west immediately to salvage his reputation, mend the shattered alliance with Octavian, and reassert his authority before the entire Roman world collapsed back into open civil war. Our parting on the docks of Alexandria was unexpectedly poignant. I was also pregnant then, the slight curve of my belly just beginning to show beneath my linen robes, a visible symbol of our union. Antony knew, and the knowledge seemed to fill him with both pride and apprehension at leaving. He spoke passionately of his eventual return, of our shared future, of the children we would raise together. We exchanged tokens charged with meaning. I presented him with a magnificent suit of golden Egyptian armor, crafted by the finest royal artisans, symbolizing that he carried Egypt's strength and fortune with him into the perilous world of Roman politics. He, in turn, pressed into my hand a finely wrought Roman dagger from his own belt, one he claimed had served him faithfully through countless campaigns. "If ever dark thoughts whisper doubt of my return, Cleopatra," he vowed, his voice rough with emotion, "look upon this steel. Remember that Mark Antony's heart remains pledged to you and to the future we build. Only death itself could sever that bond." His words were deeply felt, I believe, yet watching his war galleys shrink against the horizon, I felt a familiar, chilling echo, the departure of another great Roman leader from my life, leaving me once more a queen reigning alone, waiting upon the unpredictable tides of Roman power struggles. Months later, news of Antony's complex maneuvers in Rome reached me via swift courier. To stabilize the volatile situation and seal a fragile peace with his rival, he had formally married Octavian's sister, the widely respected and virtuous Octavia. My mind registered the cold political calculus, a necessary pact in the treacherous game of Roman alliances, a strategic necessity to quell immediate conflict after the disastrous Fulvia episode. Octavia was known for her dignity. The marriage shored up Antony's Roman credentials. Yet my heart could not entirely ignore the sharp, unexpected sting. Had the memory of our intense Alexandrian winter faded so quickly under the cold Italian sky? Was I, Queen of Egypt, a partner to be balanced against a proper Roman wife? I pushed the unwelcome thought aside. His continued letters, filled with affection, assurances, and longing for Alexandria, suggested our connection remained paramount in his mind, or so I chose to believe, focusing instead on the tasks at hand. In the following months, my personal world expanded joyously, even as the political landscape remained fraught with uncertainty. I bore twins, a healthy boy and girl, reflecting their symbolic connection to the celestial powers and our ambitions for a harmonized world. We named them Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene Alexander's Sun and Cleopatra Moon. They were beautiful, strong children, and raising them in the palace nurseries provided solace, purpose, and a tangible focus for my fierce protective instincts amidst Antony's prolonged absence. Holding them, their innocent warmth grounding me, reinforced my determination to safeguard their future, and Egypt's, against all odds. Their existence was the living proof of my dynasty's enduring vitality. For 3 years, while Antony remained entangled in the West, dealing with lingering Republican resistance, Parthian border skirmishes, simmering tensions with Octavian, and establishing his authority across Greece and Asia Minor, with Octavia often dutifully by his side, I ruled Egypt alone. And Egypt thrived. Unlike Rome, perpetually convulsed by civil strife, my kingdom enjoyed stability and growing prosperity under my direct administration. The Nile floods were adequate. The granaries remained full. Alexandria's trade routes flourished under careful management. New building projects were initiated. The ancient temples were honored with proper ceremony, and the Egyptian people seemed largely content under a pharaoh who spoke their tongue, respected their gods, and visibly cared for their welfare. My grip on power was firm, my administration efficient. By 37 BCE, however, the uneasy truce between Antony and Octavian was fraying rapidly. Antony, burning to achieve military glory rivaling Caesar's and erase the stain of Rome's earlier humiliations, desperately needed vast resources funds, ships, grain, troops for his long-planned massive campaign against the formidable Parthian Empire. He knew well that the richest treasury, the most reliable grain supply, and the largest available fleet in the entire eastern Mediterranean resided in Egypt under my control, and I, in turn, was prepared to provide substantial aid, but not unconditionally, Egypt's support would come at a price, a tangible recognition of my sovereignty and my children's legitimacy. Finally, late in 37 BCE, Antony and I arranged to meet once more, this time on neutral ground in Antioch, the great Syrian metropolis. I traveled overland from Egypt, bringing our 3-year-old twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, accompanied by a retinue designed to display Egypt's wealth and my own undiminished status. Antony arrived from Athens, having pointedly left Octavia and the children she had borne him behind in Greece, signaling a clear shift in his priorities. Our reunion, after 3 long years apart, was as politically charged as it was emotionally overwhelming. When we finally saw each other again across the crowded floor of the governor's palace in Antioch, the careful masks of diplomacy momentarily vanished. Antony strode towards me, his familiar, charismatic energy radiating undimmed, and without hesitation swept me into a powerful, exuberant embrace before the startled eyes of stern Roman legates and assembled Eastern client kings. It was a spontaneous public declaration that required no additional words. The intervening years, the political marriage, seemed to melt away in that instant. The profound bond forged in Alexandria remained unbroken, perhaps even strengthened by the separation and the undeniable realization of our mutual need and shared destiny. During intensive discussions over the following days in Antioch, Antony and I forged a grand history-altering compact. I formally agreed to provide him with immense financial backing, crucial grain supplies, and a significant portion of Egypt's powerful fleet for his war against Parthia. In return, Antony publicly acknowledged our twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, as his legitimate children. More consequentially, he agreed to formally restore to Egyptian control, meaning effectively, to my administration, benefiting my dynasty, a number of strategically and economically vital territories that had been stripped away from the Ptolemaic kingdom over preceding generations, or could now be carved from adjacent domains. This momentous agreement included significant parts of coastal Syria, Phoenicia, including the famously lucrative balm-producing region of Jericho, previously managed by Herod of Judea, who became my resentful tenant, portions of Cilicia, the strategically important island of Cyprus, seized by Rome decades earlier, and Crete. These donations of Antioch, as they became known, represented a staggering expansion of my influence and a bold reshaping of the political map of the East, effectively creating a vast Cleopatran sphere of influence, backed by Antony's Roman authority. We also spoke explicitly of the future roles our children would play, envisioning them as rulers over various portions of this new consolidated Eastern realm, reigning under our joint overlordship. Some of Antony's more conservative Roman advisors were reportedly aghast at the scale of these grants. One Roman officer notoriously quipped, with coarse soldierly resentment, that Antony had given away the storehouse of the Roman East to his Egyptian whore. When I caught wind of this predictable Roman chauvinism, I merely laughed it off publicly, treating it with the contempt it deserved. In private, however, I ensured that particular advisors' influence over Antony waned considerably thereafter. Jealous Romans and nervous client kings would simply have to accept the new reality. Cleopatra was not merely Antony's lover or a supplicant benefactor. She was his indispensable political partner, the co-architect of a powerful new Eastern order. In 36 BCE, while Antony was deeply engaged in launching his ambitious and ultimately disastrous invasion deep into Parthian territory, I gave birth to our 3rd child together, another healthy son, whom we named Ptolemy Philadelphus, brother-loving, a traditional Ptolemaic royal name, subtly emphasizing dynastic continuity. Antony was far away on the harsh battlefields of Media when the news reached him, but I received back a messenger carrying a letter brimming with doting paternal delight for another robust son strengthening our line. He joked, perhaps half seriously, that between the two of us, we were well on our way to populating our own magnificent Roman-Egyptian dynasty, destined to rule the Eastern world for generations. In my heart, already dreaming of empires secured for my children, I did not perceive it as a jest at all. I saw it as a tantalizing, achievable future, worth fighting and risking everything for. Antony's Parthian campaign, unfortunately, ended not in glorious conquest, but in harrowing retreat. Despite initial successes, his legions were decimated by fierce Parthian resistance, treacherous Armenian allies, and the brutal onset of an early, savage winter. He suffered devastating losses, thousands of Roman soldiers dying from battle wounds, starvation, and exposure in the snowy mountain passes, a military catastrophe that severely damaged his prestige. He wrote to me from Armenia, his letters starkly different now, filled not with boasts, but with exhaustion, bitterness, and palpable shame. Recognizing his vulnerability and needing to reinforce his wavering spirit, I responded immediately, not with criticism or conditions, but with unwavering public support and tangible aid. I dispatched fresh troops recruited in Egypt, urgently sent shiploads of warm clothing and vital supplies, and provided significant new funds to help re-equip his battered, demoralized forces. More importantly, perhaps, I urged him to return not to Rome, where political enemies like Octavian surely circled like vultures eager to exploit his weakness, but to the safety and restorative embrace of Alexandria. That winter of 36-35 BCE, he did come back to me, arriving in Alexandria, haggard, humbled, physically weakened, haunted by the ghosts of the thousands of legionaries he had lost. Some Roman commanders, facing such a defeat, might have been met with blame or cold political calculation, but I welcomed him openly, without a hint of reproach or disappointment, offering only warmth, solace, steadfast loyalty, and the restorative comforts of Egypt. It was perhaps in nursing his wounded pride, sharing his grief without judgment, demonstrating that my allegiance was not contingent solely upon victory, that our partnership deepened irrevocably. He saw that my support was absolute. Increasingly, Alexandria, not Rome, became his true refuge, his strategic base, his emotional anchor in a turbulent world. He recovered his spirit gradually, fueled by my unwavering belief in him and the comforts of our life together. Soon, his thoughts turned again to military action, to restoring his reputation. Together, we planned a new campaign, a swifter, more achievable punitive expedition against the duplicitous King Artavasdes of Armenia, whose betrayal had contributed significantly to the Parthian disaster. This campaign, launched in 34 BCE with better preparation and Egyptian support, succeeded brilliantly. Antony captured the Armenian king and his family, annexed the kingdom, and returned to Alexandria laden with Armenian treasure and restored prestige. And it was with this decisive victory as a backdrop that Antony and I decided to stage our most audacious public statement yet, a spectacular ceremony that would formally declare our shared vision for the future of the East and irrevocably set us on a collision course with Octavian's Rome. Chapter 8. Lords of the East. In the crisp, bright Alexandrian autumn of 34 BCE, Antony and I orchestrated a spectacle designed to resonate throughout the Eastern world, a deliberate and magnificent assertion of our joint authority and dynastic ambitions, the famed donations of Alexandria. We chose as our stage the city's great gymnasium, a vast colonnaded space near the site where Alexander the Great's revered body supposedly lay, enshrined a location imbued with historical resonance and Ptolemaic legitimacy. Before a huge assembly comprising Alexandrian citizens, delegations from allied territories, foreign dignitaries, and ranks of Antony's Roman legionaries, alongside our own Egyptian troops, we staged a breathtaking display of Hellenistic royal pageantry mixed with potent Roman triumphalism. Antony and I ascended a high, specially constructed silver-plated dais, taking our places upon gleaming golden thrones. I wore the most sacred regalia of the living Isis, a gown seemingly woven from moonlight and gold threads, the distinctive vulture head-dress surmounted by the sun disk cradled between cow's horns upon my head, and coiled around my upper arm, a golden uraeus asp bracelet, its jeweled eyes glittering. I consciously embodied the mother goddess, Pharaoh of Egypt, bestower of bounty and authority. Beside me, Antony made a deliberate choice not to appear as a Roman general. Instead, he donned a sumptuous Eastern robe of purple silk, richly embroidered, and wore a Persian-style diadem upon his brow, presenting himself as Dionysus Osiris, the triumphant consort god, embracing the Hellenistic kingly ideal over Roman austerity. It was a visual declaration. We ruled here, together, bridging two traditions, God's manifest on earth. At our feet, seated on slightly lower, but still ornate thrones, were our children, living symbols of our dynastic project. Young Alexander Helios, barely 6 years old, looked endearingly regal, dressed as a miniature Macedonian conqueror, a tiny purple cloak fastened at his shoulder, a small golden diadem encircling his curls. His twin sister, Cleopatra Selene, sat beside him, a miniature moon princess in a flowing gown embroidered with silver stars, her dark eyes wide with childish wonder. Toddling Ptolemy Philadelphus, held securely by his nurse, but crowned with a diminutive version of the pharaonic double crown, represented the future promise of our line. And presiding over it all, with conscious dramatic effect, stood my eldest son, Caesarion Howe, a grave, intelligent boy of 13, clad in Hellenistic royal attire, but implicitly embodying his unique Roman heritage, ready to receive his paramount honors. Off to one side, as a tangible symbol of Antony's recent military triumph, stood the captive Armenian king Artavasdes and his family, bound in ornamental silver chains, treated with outward respect but serving undeniably as props in our grand geopolitical theater. Amidst flourishes of trumpets and ritual pronouncements delivered by heralds in both Greek and Latin, Antony formally began the ceremonial distribution of lands and titles. He first declared me, Cleopatra, with resounding titles amplified through the vast space, Queen of Kings, reaffirming my supreme sovereignty over Egypt, Cyprus, Libya, and Coele-Syria, the contested region between Egypt and Seleucid Syria, lands already effectively under my control, or historically claimed by my dynasty. The Alexandrian part of the crowd roared its approval at this elevation of their queen. Then, rising from my throne, embodying Isis, bestowing legitimacy upon her consort Osiris, I formally proclaimed Antony King of Kings, acknowledging his supreme authority over the territories he controlled and positioning him as my divine and earthly partner. He then proceeded to grant kingdoms to our young children, naming them monarchs of vast territories across the eastern Mediterranean and beyond. Alexander Helios was boldly proclaimed King of Armenia, already conquered, Media, and even Parthia, a statement of future intent, symbolizing the vast ambitions driving Antony's policy. Cleopatra Selene was named Queen of Cyrenaica, west of Egypt, and Crete. Little Ptolemy Philadelphus was designated the future king of Phoenicia Syria, north of Coele-Syria, and Cilicia. Finally, came the moment I had strategically anticipated, the affirmation that went to the heart of Roman politics and my deepest maternal ambition. Antony turned to Caesarion. With deliberate weight, he proclaimed my firstborn son, Ptolemy Caesar, not merely co-ruler of Egypt, but awarded him the resonant titles King of Kings, and, most significantly, explicitly declared him the true and legitimate son of the divine Julius Caesar. My heart swelled, a potent mixture of maternal pride, fierce enough to ache, and cool, calculated political triumph. Declaring Caesar's son his legitimate heir in this grand public forum, witnessed by representatives from across the East, was a direct challenge to Octavian's entire basis of power, which rested upon his adoption by Caesar. It was rewriting history, asserting my son's claim, backed by Antony's might, before the world. It felt like fulfilling a promise made long ago to Julius himself, a validation whispered across the veils of death. The predominantly Alexandrian crowd erupted with each pronouncement, intoxicated by the vision of renewed Ptolemaic power, the distribution of kingdoms like divine gifts, and the sheer magnificent audacity of it all. Antony's Roman soldiers watched, perhaps somewhat bewildered by the Eastern pomp, but impressed by the display of power and wealth. The few Roman officials present likely sat pale and stone-faced, recognizing the irrevocable political gauntlet being thrown down to Octavian and the Senate in Rome. This was no mere celebration. It was the foundation ceremony for a new Eastern Empire, centered in Alexandria, ruled by our dynasty, implicitly rivaling Rome itself. After the formal ceremony concluded, we feasted lavishly, a celebration echoing the banquets of gods depicted on temple walls. Music swelled, dancers performed, wine flowed freely. I will never forget the sheer joy of that moment, dancing with my little Alexander Helios held proudly in my arms, his innocent laughter ringing out, while Antony, beaming with paternal pride, and perhaps the flush of wine, hoisted a slightly overwhelmed Caesarian onto his broad shoulders, parading him around the cheering hall as loyal soldiers pounded their spears against their shields in thunderous acclaim. In those intoxicating moments, caught between the echoes of ancient pharaonic glory and the vibrant promise of a newly configured Hellenistic world, anything seemed possible. Perhaps even that this fragile, glorious balance of power, this dream of an Eastern empire ruled from Alexandria, could somehow endure against the looming shadow of Rome. Yet, even amidst the exultation, a colder part of my mind registered the immensity of the gamble, the dangerous currents stirred by our bold proclamations. We had irrevocably crossed a line, and the consequences, I knew, would soon follow from the West. Chapter 9. The War of Propaganda and the March to Actium. The repercussions from the donations of Alexandria arrived swiftly, not as legions initially, but as poisoned words carried on Roman winds. Octavian, that master manipulator of public opinion, seized upon our grand ceremony as the perfect weapon in his relentless propaganda campaign. Reports flooded back to Alexandria, relayed by loyal agents and nervous merchants. In Rome, lurid tales circulated painting Antony as a man utterly bewitched, lost to reason under the spell of an oriental sorceress, meaning me. They whispered I had emasculated him with luxurious decadence and magic potions, that he was recklessly giving away hard-won Roman territories to a foreign harlot queen and her illegitimate brood. They twisted our vision of a powerful, allied East into a treasonous betrayal of Roman values, depicting Antony as a puppet dancing on my strings. I scoffed inwardly at these predictable, crude caricatures when the reports reached my ears. How little these Romans understood Mark Antony. He was no lovesick fool to be easily led. He possessed a formidable will of his own. He chose our shared path because he genuinely believed in our joint destiny, because he chafed under Octavian's cold, calculating dominance in the West. And yes, because he found in Alexandria a vitality and culture that resonated more deeply with his expansive spirit than the increasingly rigid confines of Rome. He chose me because he saw a partner worthy of his ambition, not merely a passive consort. As for myself, was I merely a seductress? Or was I a queen using every tool at my disposal, intellect, charm, resources, and shared affection to secure my kingdom and dynasty against Rome's relentless expansion? The Romans, blinded by their xenophobia and misogyny, could only imagine the latter. Still, I recognized the dangerous power of such narratives. Words could be as lethal as swords, especially in shaping Roman senatorial opinion and legionary loyalty. The situation escalated dramatically when Antony, weary of the political complexities and perhaps genuinely desiring clarity in his allegiances, formally divorced Octavia in 32 BCE. He sent her official notice to leave his house in Athens, a move that, while solidifying his commitment to our Eastern partnership, was politically explosive in Rome. Octavian exploited this deeply, painting his noble sister as the wronged, virtuous Roman matron cruelly cast aside for the corrupting foreign queen. This narrative resonated powerfully with traditional Roman sensibilities, further isolating Antony from potential allies in Italy and damaging his reputation even among some of his own veterans. Though Antony made the decision, I became the inevitable target of Roman outrage. Octavian pressed his advantage ruthlessly. Seizing upon the donations and the divorce, he engineered the final political break. In a calculated move designed to avoid directly alienating Antony's remaining loyalists among the legions, the Roman Senate, under intense pressure from Octavian, officially stripped Antony of his consular powers and formally declared war, not on Antony himself, a fellow Roman triumvir, but specifically and strategically on me, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. I was declared a public enemy of Rome, the monstrous foreign threat against whom a holy war, a bellum justum, could be righteously waged. To seal this narrative, Octavian controversially seized Antony's legally deposited will from the Temple of Vesta in Rome and read selected passages aloud, passages, whether authentic or cleverly forged, confirming Antony's desire to be buried alongside me in Alexandria and acknowledging our children. This act, a shocking violation of sacred tradition, cemented the perception for many Romans that Antony had irrevocably gone native, abandoning Rome for his Egyptian enchantress. Antony, furious at Octavian's maneuvering and the Senate's decree, sent word urging me not to lose heart. He assured me this was merely Octavian's cynical ploy. Together, we responded with defiance. We rallied our combined forces throughout the East, assembling a mighty fleet drawn from Egypt and allied states, and gathering legions still loyal to Antony. I, in turn, marshaled Egypt's considerable naval strength, the swift Nile galleys, and larger warships, and committed the vast resources of my treasury without reservation. This was not merely Antony's fight. It was a battle for Egypt's survival, for my children's future, for the very vision of the world we had dared to create. We decided to make our stand in Greece, strategically positioning ourselves to intercept Octavian's inevitable westward advance. Before departing Alexandria, the city that was both my heart and my power base, I made a solemn tour of the great temples, making unusually rich offerings, to Ptah and Memphis, seeking the steadfastness of the Creator God, to Ammon at the remote oasis of Siwa, consulting the ancient oracle that had guided Alexander, and spending days in deep prayer and ritual at the sacred island temple of Isis at Philae, my patron goddess. I sought her blessing, her guidance, her strength for the trials ahead. One quiet dawn, meditating in cool inner sanctum before her serene statue, I felt a profound sense of calm descend, a vision not of battle, but of purpose. The Nile merging with the Tiber, not in subjugation, but perhaps in a transformed future, a unified realm where my descendants might bridge both worlds. I clung to this image, taking it as a divine sign that our cause, however perilous, was cosmically significant. It infused me with unwavering resolve. In the spring of 31 BCE, leaving trusted officials to govern Egypt in my absence and safeguard my younger children, though Caesarion, now 14, and fiercely determined to prove his worth, insisted on accompanying Antony and me. Antony and I set sail at the head of our formidable combined forces. The departure from Alexandria's great harbor was marked by both apprehension and determination. Watching my beloved city recede, the cheers of the loyal crowds lining the shores echoing across the water, I felt the immense weight of responsibility settle upon me. Failure meant not just personal ruin, but the end of pharaonic Egypt. I stood on the deck of my flagship, the Antonia, resplendent in polished armor, detailed with gold and the royal uraeus, waving reassuringly to my people, projecting confidence even as my heart pounded with the magnitude of the stakes. Before sailing further west into Greek waters, Antony and I made a deliberate pilgrimage together to the legendary plains of Troy. Amidst the windswept ruins where Homer's epic heroes had clashed centuries before, We paid homage at the traditional sites associated with Achilles and Hector. Antony claimed descent from Hercules, and through him, connections to the heroes of Troy. My own lineage traced back through Alexander to the gods. In that evocative, myth-laden place, we sought to draw strength from the ancient legends, pledging to fight with the courage of Achilles and the cunning of Odysseus. As I poured libations onto the dry earth, supposedly near the tombs of fallen Trojan heroes, I felt a strange, poignant kinship across the millennia with those, like Hecuba or Andromache, who had faced overwhelming force in defense of their city and their loved ones. I refused, however, to see our fate reflected solely in their tragedy. Instead, I silently invoked the defiant spirit of those queens who had successfully resisted invaders, Arsinoe II, my own formidable ancestress, or even the semi-legendary Candace of Nubia, who had reportedly defied Alexander himself. We would fight not just bravely, but wisely. We established our main naval and military base at Actium, a strategic location on the western coast of Greece, commanding the entrance to the Ambracian Gulf. Our combined fleet was enormous, a vast armada numbering hundreds of warships, including my powerful Egyptian contingent, featuring massive, towering multi-banked galleys equipped with heavy catapults and bronze rams, designed for shock action. On land, our assembled legions technically outnumbered Octavian's initial forces. Victory seemed achievable, perhaps even likely, if we could force a decisive engagement quickly on our terms. Yet, as the summer weeks dragged on, a frustrating and dangerous stalemate developed. Octavian, guided by his exceptionally skilled admiral Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, refused to be drawn into a pitched battle. Instead, Agrippa's lighter, swifter Liburni galleys harassed our supply lines relentlessly, conducting raids along the coast, gradually tightening a de facto blockade. Our vast army, encamped ashore, began to suffer from shortages of food and fresh water. Disease started to spread in the crowded camps. Morale, initially high, began to erode under the pressure of inactivity, deprivation, and Agrippa's relentless naval skirmishes. Some of our allied Eastern client kings, their initial enthusiasm waning as they observed Octavian's patient strategy and growing strength, began to waver, quietly withdrawing troops or sending secret feelers towards Octavian's camp. The waiting gnawed at Antony's impatient spirit, and at mine as well decisive action, even risky action, always felt preferable to slow attritional decline. It was during those tense, sweltering days of stalemate at Actium that I faced perhaps the greatest direct challenge to my presence and authority within Antony's camp. Many of his senior Roman officers, steeped in traditional Roman military values and deeply resentful of my influence and prominent role in the campaign, a queen commanding alongside a Roman general, began to openly pressure Antony. Send Cleopatra back to Egypt. Her presence demoralizes the men. Fight this as a Roman war without the distractions of an Eastern queen. They blamed me, subtly or overtly, for every setback, every shortage, every perceived slight to Roman pride. One evening, Antony, his face etched with exhaustion and the strain of command, confided this growing pressure to me, his eyes haunted by the internal conflict tearing at him. He even tentatively offered me a squadron of ships, guaranteeing safe passage back to Egypt if I wished to remove myself from the immediate danger and the political friction. I reacted instantly, fiercely, rejecting the notion with cold fury. Do you think me some faint-hearted chattel, Mark Antony, to flee at the first sign of difficulty? I demanded, my voice low but shaking with indignation. Am I a pleasure consort to be sent away when the real fighting begins? Or am I Queen of Egypt, your ally, the mother of your children, who has staked her kingdom and her life alongside yours? My place is here, with this fleet, with you, to the very end, whatever that may be. He looked taken aback, perhaps even shamed by the intensity of my response. Any thought that he might appease his Roman officers at my expense vanished. He apologized gruffly for even suggesting it. His respect for my strength rekindled. In that moment of crisis, Faced with the choice between Roman pressure and our shared destiny, we drew closer, our resolve hardening into a unified front. He would not send me away. We would face this together. And seeing the dwindling supplies and crumbling morale, we made the fateful decision. We could no longer afford to wait passively. We would break the blockade, force a naval battle, and stake everything on one decisive day's outcome. To linger further was to invite disintegration and defeat by degrees. Better to risk all on a bold stroke. Thus, on the morning of September 2nd, 31 BCE, under a sky that seemed unnaturally bright and clear, our combined fleet began to sail out from the protective confines of the Ambracian Gulf to meet Octavian's waiting armada in the open waters of the Ionian Sea. As I stood armored on the elevated deck of my flagship, the Antonia, watching our vast formation maneuver slowly into position, I looked across the water towards Antony's command vessel, keeping pace nearby, and then ahead, towards the horizon, where the ominous dark line of enemy sails emerged like a flock of predatory birds gathering for the kill. I unconsciously gripped the hilt of the Roman dagger Antony had given me years before, its cool metal a tangible link to our intertwined fates, and whispered a silent, urgent prayer, not just to Isis, but to Poseidon, to Fortuna, to any god or goddess that might favor the bold and the desperate. Let this day decide, I murmured under my breath, lifting my chin defiantly against the sea spray. The die, as Julius himself might have said, was irrevocably cast. Our fates, the fate of Egypt, the future shape of the Roman world, were now entrusted to the capricious sea winds, the brutal shock of bronze rams, and the blood that was about to be spilled upon the wine-dark water. One way or another, the world as we knew it was about to be violently transformed, and the name Cleopatra would either be etched forever in the annals of victory or finally extinguished in the bitter ashes of defeat.